The snow fell like shattered glass against the windshield as three patrol cars surrounded the lone figure stumbling through Cedar Falls' main street. In his arms, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket, a newborn baby's cries pierced the December night, desperate, breathless sounds that spoke of lungs fighting for every breath. What those officers didn't know, what their German shepherd straining against his leash couldn't possibly understand, was that the homeless veteran they were about to unleash their K9 on had once commanded that very dog through the killing fields of Afghanistan. David Carson had saved Rex's life when shrapnel tore through the shepherd's flank during a Taliban ambush. Rex had returned the favor, dragging David's unconscious body to safety as mortars rained down around them. Now, 5 years later, neither recognized the other in the swirling snow. But some bonds, forged in blood and battle, run deeper than memory. And tonight, that bond would either save them both or destroy everything David had left to live for. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, David Carson had been a different man. The apartment in Cedar Falls wasn't much, a one-bedroom above Murphy's hardware store, but it had been home. Sarah's medical textbook still lined the shelves, her coffee mug still sat in the sink, unwashed since the morning she'd kissed him goodbye and driven to the hospital for what should have been a routine checkup. The call came at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in June. Complications during delivery, emergency C-section. The baby was fighting, but Sarah's heart had simply stopped. The doctors used words like amniotic embolism and couldn't have prevented it. But David heard only silence, the same deafening quiet that had followed IED explosions in Kandahar province. Baby Michael arrived weighing 4 pounds 2 ounces, his tiny fists clenched as if already preparing to fight a world that had taken his mother before he could meet her. David held his son in the NICU, whispering promises through the plastic walls of the incubator, his voice still rough from the shrapnel that had damaged his vocal cords 3 years prior. The medical bills came first, followed by the funeral expenses Sarah's life insurance barely covered. David's disability checks weren't enough, they never were. The VA had promised job training, counseling, support. What they delivered were forms in triplicate and waiting lists that stretched longer than deployment rotations. Chief Robert Harrison had built his reputation on 30 years of small-town policing, but the ghosts of Afghanistan haunted him in ways no one in Cedar Falls understood. His son Tommy, 19 years old, bright smile, full of patriotic fire, had volunteered for the Army straight out of high school. The folded flag sat on Harrison's mantle, delivered by officers who spoke of honor and sacrifice, while Harrison's world crumbled like ancient stone. Tommy had been killed when his convoy hit an improvised explosive device outside Kabul. The military report mentioned a K9 unit present, suggested the dog should have detected the threat. Harrison's grief had hardened into something darker, a belief that the system had failed his boy, that someone, somewhere, should have done more. Rex, now 8 years old, carried his own invisible wounds. The German Shepherd's service record showed 12 deployments, 47 confirmed saves, and 1 Purple Heart equivalent for injuries sustained in combat. His current handler, Officer Jake Mitchell, saw only an aging dog with hip problems and an occasional reluctance to follow commands, not understanding that Rex's hesitation came from memories of orders that had led good men into harm's way. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had sewn up more soldiers than she cared to count during her deployment as a field medic. Now, working in Cedar Falls' small hospital, she recognized the signs. The careful way David moved, protecting old injuries, the distant look that meant his mind was somewhere far from Montana's quiet streets. None of them knew how their lives would collide on a snowy Christmas Eve, when desperation and duty would force them to confront the ghosts they'd all been running from. The eviction notice had been taped to David's door for 3 days, fluttering in the December wind like a white flag of surrender. 24 hours to vacate. No exceptions, no extensions. The landlord's patience had finally worn thin after 2 months of partial payments and empty promises. David stood in the doorway of what had been his home, holding baby Michael against his chest, feeling the weight of failure settle into his bones like winter cold. The apartment looked smaller now, stripped of hope. Sarah's books still sat on the shelves, medical journals she'd never finished reading, dreams that had died with her in a sterile delivery room 6 months ago. "Come on, buddy," David whispered to his son, his damaged voice barely carrying above the wind. "We'll figure this out." The baby's formula was gone. The last can had been scraped clean that morning, mixed with water that was probably too cold but was all David could manage. Michael's cries had grown weaker over the past day, less demanding, and that terrified David more than the loudest screams. Babies were supposed to cry. Silence meant surrender. The walk to Cedar Falls General Hospital would take 40 minutes in good weather. Tonight, with snow falling like frozen judgment and the wind cutting through his worn army jacket, it might take an hour. But the emergency room wouldn't turn away a sick baby, wouldn't ask about insurance cards or payment plans until after they'd made sure Michael was breathing properly. David wrapped his son in every blanket he owned. A thin hospital receiving blanket from Michael's birth, Sarah's old wool throw that still smelled faintly of her perfume, and his own Army-issued field blanket that had kept him warm through 3 Afghan winters. Layer by layer he built a fortress against the cold, knowing it wouldn't be enough but having nothing else to give. The first few blocks weren't so bad. Main Street was mostly sheltered by buildings, and the streetlights cast pools of yellow warmth that felt almost hopeful. David found a rhythm. Step, step. Check the baby. Step, step. Adjust the blankets. Michael slept fitfully, his breathing shallow but steady. But as they moved toward the hospital, leaving the town center behind, the storm grew vicious. The wind picked up, driving snow horizontal, turning each step into a battle. David pulled his knit cap lower, hunched his shoulders, and pressed on. Military training had taught him to keep moving when everything in his body screamed to stop, 1 foot in front of the other. Mission first. It was Mrs. Henderson from Elm Street who called the police. From her kitchen window, she'd seen a figure stumbling through the snow carrying what looked like a bundle. In a town where everyone knew everyone, a stranger walking through a blizzard at midnight raised alarm bells. She meant well. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other, but good intentions and harsh realities didn't always align. "Police dispatch, this is Mrs. Henderson at 1247 Elm. There's someone walking through the storm out here. Looks like they might be in trouble. Can't tell if it's a man or woman, but they're carrying something. Might be hurt." The call came through just as Chief Harrison was finishing his paperwork, trying to avoid going home to an empty house on Christmas Eve. He'd volunteered for the holiday shift again, same as every year since Tommy's death. Home meant silence, meant staring at that folded flag and wondering what he could have done differently. "Unit 12, respond to welfare check on Elm Street," the dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. "Possible person in distress." Harrison grabbed his coat and keys. In 30 years of policing, he'd learned that Christmas brought out both the best and worst in people. Domestic disputes spiked around the holidays, so did suicides, and sometimes, just sometimes, good people found themselves in bad situations that required nothing more than a helping hand. Officer Jake Mitchell was already in his patrol car, Rex sleeping in the back behind the protective barrier. The German shepherd had been restless all evening, pacing in his kennel at the station, whining at sounds only he could hear. Mitchell figured it was the storm. Animals always got nervous before bad weather. Rex had been assigned to the Cedar Falls Police Department 2 years ago when the military retired him due to arthritis and what the veterinarians called combat stress. The town council had voted to accept the war dog as a gesture of support for veterans, though few understood what that really meant. To them, Rex was just another police dog, useful for drug searches and crowd control. They had no idea that Rex had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, that he'd saved 17 lives by detecting improvised explosive devices, that he'd once dragged a wounded soldier through enemy fire to reach a medical evacuation helicopter. His service record was classified, buried in military bureaucracy, and his current handlers saw only an aging dog with creaky joints and an expensive appetite. David was 3 blocks from the hospital when he felt Michael's breathing change. The tiny chest wasn't rising as regularly, and when David pulled back the blankets to check, his son's lips had a blue tinge that made his heart stop. Hypothermia. The cold was winning. "Stay with me, buddy," David gasped, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Almost there. Daddy's got you." But even as he said it, David knew they might not make it. His own body was shutting down, his feet numb in boots that had given up their waterproofing years ago. The storm was getting worse, visibility dropping to mere feet. He could barely see the hospital's emergency room lights in the distance. That's when the first patrol car's headlights cut through the snow, sweeping across the street like searchlights. David froze, instinctively pulling Michael closer. In his exhausted, hypothermic state, the approaching car looked less like salvation and more like judgment. Chief Harrison stepped out of his vehicle, his flashlight beam finding David immediately. What he saw was a man in military surplus clothing, hunched against the storm, clutching a bundle that could be anything: stolen goods, drugs, a weapon. The chief's hand moved instinctively to his service pistol, not drawing it but ready. "Sir, I need you to stop right there," Harrison called out, his voice carrying authority developed over 3 decades of policing. "Keep your hands where I can see them." David tried to speak, tried to explain, but his damaged vocal cords produced only a harsh whisper that the wind swallowed immediately. He raised one hand, the other still supporting Michael, trying to show he wasn't a threat, but in the darkness and swirling snow, his movements looked furtive, suspicious. That's when Officer Mitchell arrived with Rex. The moment Officer Mitchell opened the rear door of his patrol car, Rex's entire demeanor changed. The aging German shepherd, who had been lying quietly despite his earlier restlessness, suddenly came alive. His ears snapped forward, his dark eyes fixed on the figure in the snow with an intensity that made Mitchell step back. "Easy, boy," Mitchell muttered, tightening his grip on the leash. Rex had never shown this kind of reaction to a suspect before. Usually, the old dog was almost bored during routine calls, going through the motions of police work without the fire that younger K9s displayed. But now, every muscle in Rex's body was taut, trembling not with aggression but with something Mitchell couldn't identify. Chief Harrison approached David slowly, his flashlight beam steady on the stranger's face. What he saw was a man probably in his 30s, stubble covering gaunt cheeks, eyes that held the particular exhaustion Harrison recognized from his own mirror. Military bearing, even in defeat. But Harrison's sympathy was tempered by caution. In his experience, desperate people did desperate things. "I need to see your hands," Harrison repeated, louder this time. "Both hands." David tried again to speak, the words coming out as barely audible croaks. "Baby. Sick. Hospital." The effort left him gasping, his breath forming desperate clouds in the frigid air. Harrison's flashlight beam dropped to the bundle in David's arms, and for the first time he saw the tiny face peering out from the layers of blankets. A baby, maybe a few weeks old, lips tinged blue with cold. The chief's entire perspective shifted in an instant. This wasn't a criminal or vagrant. This was a father trying to save his child. But before Harrison could react, Rex made a sound that Mitchell had never heard before. Not a bark or growl, but a low whine that seemed to come from the deepest part of the dog's chest. The German Shepherd pulled against his leash, not aggressively, but with desperate urgency, as if he needed to reach the man in the snow. "What's gotten into him?" Harrison asked, noting the dog's strange behavior. Mitchell shook his head, confused. "I don't know, Chief. He's been acting weird all evening. Never seen him like this." Rex's behavior was becoming more erratic by the second. The dog sat down abruptly, then stood again, circling as much as his leash would allow. His eyes never left David's face, and that low whining continued, a sound of recognition and desperate communication. David, fighting hypothermia and exhaustion, looked at the German Shepherd and felt something stir in his memory. The dog's markings, the way he held his head, the distinctive scar along his left flank that was visible even in the dim light. It couldn't be. The odds were impossible. But as David stared at Rex, fragments of memory began piecing themselves together like shards of a broken mirror. "Rex?" David whispered, the name barely audible but carrying a tone that made the dog's ears snap forward like antennas tuning to a distant signal. The effect was immediate and undeniable. Rex lunged forward with such force that Mitchell nearly lost his grip on the leash. The dog's tail, which had been still moments before, began a tentative wag. But more than that, Rex performed a behavior that made both officers step back in surprise. He dropped into a perfect military rest position, chest low, hindquarters up, the classic stance of a working dog awaiting orders. "What the hell?" Mitchell breathed. Harrison's mind raced. He'd been a police officer long enough to know when something didn't add up, and this situation was rapidly moving beyond his understanding. The homeless man clearly knew the dog, and Rex's response suggested a connection deeper than casual acquaintance. Military dogs were trained to respond to specific handlers, to form bonds that lasted years beyond active service. "Sir," Harrison said, his voice taking on a different tone, "I need you to tell me who you are." David fumbled in his jacket pocket with numb fingers, finally producing a worn military ID card and a crumpled birth certificate. His hands shook as he held them out, Michael's weight making every movement difficult. Harrison took the documents, shining his flashlight on them. "David Carson, Sergeant First Class, Army K-9 Unit." He looked up at David with new recognition. "You're military." David nodded, then gestured weakly toward Rex. "Afghanistan, 2018, third deployment." His damaged voice failed him, but his eyes held a desperate plea for understanding. Mitchell looked between David and Rex, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "Chief, you don't think this could be—" "His handler," Harrison finished. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just any homeless veteran. This was the man who had trained and worked with Rex during active duty. The bond they were witnessing had been forged in combat, tested under fire, and somehow survived the chaos of military discharge and civilian reintegration. Rex, as if sensing the humans were beginning to understand, performed another action that left no doubt about his identity. He executed a perfect tactical approach, low and controlled, stopping exactly 3 feet from David, close enough to offer support, far enough to maintain tactical awareness. It was a movement so precise, so military in its execution, that it could only have been learned in a war zone. "Jesus Christ," Mitchell whispered. "How long has it been since they've seen each other?" David's eyes filled with tears that froze on his cheeks before they could fall. 5 years, he managed to croak. Thought he was dead." The baby in David's arms chose that moment to let out a weak cry, barely audible above the wind. Rex's response was immediate. He moved closer, his body language shifting from military alertness to protective concern. The dog's warm breath created small clouds as he sniffed gently at the bundle, his tail now wagging steadily. Harrison found himself at a crossroads. Protocol demanded that he process this situation by the book. Welfare check on a suspicious person, verify identity, determine if any crimes had been committed. But standing in the snow, watching a war dog reunite with his handler while a baby fought hypothermia, protocol seemed inadequate to address the human drama unfolding before him. "The hospital," David gasped, his strength finally giving out. "Please. He's so cold." Harrison looked at the baby, at David swaying on his feet, at Rex positioned protectively beside them both. The chief had seen enough tragedy in his career to recognize it approaching. Without immediate medical attention, that baby wasn't going to survive the night. "Mitchell, get on the radio. Tell dispatch we need an ambulance to Cedar Falls General, emergency transport for an infant." Harrison turned back to David. "We're getting you both to the hospital. Now." But as they prepared to load David and Michael into the patrol car, Rex began exhibiting new behavior that troubled both officers. The dog was limping more noticeably, his breathing labored. The excitement of seeing David again had masked what Mitchell now realized was significant pain. "Chief," Mitchell said quietly, "I think Rex is hurt worse than we thought. Look at how he's moving." Harrison watched as the German Shepherd struggled to keep up, his arthritis clearly aggravated by the cold and stress. The dog's service to his country had left him broken in ways that weren't visible until moments like this, when duty called louder than pain. The irony wasn't lost on Harrison. Here were two veterans, man and dog, both damaged by their service, both struggling to survive in a system that had moved on without them. The realization hit him with uncomfortable force, stirring memories of his own son that he'd tried to bury beneath years of routine police work. As they reached the patrol cars, David collapsed to his knees in the snow, his strength finally exhausted. Rex immediately moved to his side, pressing his warm body against David's, offering what comfort he could. The image, a broken soldier and his faithful dog supporting each other in a winter storm, would stay with Harrison for the rest of his life. The emergency room at Cedar Falls General blazed with fluorescent urgency as David stumbled through the automatic doors, Rex limping beside him despite Officer Mitchell's attempts to restrain the determined German Shepherd. The warm air hit them like a physical blow after the bitter cold, and baby Michael stirred in David's arms, letting out a weak cry that sent nurses rushing toward them. "We need help here," Chief Harrison called out, his voice cutting through the typical late-night emergency room chaos. "Hypothermic infant, possible frostbite." Dr. Elena Rodriguez appeared as if summoned, her practiced eyes immediately assessing the situation. She took one look at the blue-tinged baby and the exhausted man holding him, and her military training kicked in. "Trauma Bay 2 now. Get me warming blankets, heated IV fluids, and call pediatrics." As the medical team swarmed around David and Michael, Dr. Rodriguez caught sight of Rex and froze. She'd seen enough military working dogs during her deployment to recognize one immediately, even retired and showing his age. The way the German Shepherd positioned himself near David, alert but not aggressive, spoke of deep training and deeper bonds. "Sir, I need you to let us take the baby," Dr. Rodriguez said gently, reaching for Michael. David's grip tightened instinctively, years of loss making him reluctant to let go of the only family he had left. "Please," David whispered, his damaged voice breaking. "He's all I have." "I understand," Dr. Rodriguez replied, her tone carrying the authority of someone who had talked soldiers through impossible decisions. "But we need to work fast. Trust me. I've saved babies in much worse conditions than this." Reluctantly, David released his son into the doctor's capable hands. The moment Michael was taken from him, David swayed dangerously, the adrenaline that had carried him through the storm finally depleting. Rex immediately pressed against his legs, providing physical support that kept David upright. Chief Harrison watched the scene unfold with growing unease. Something about the interaction between David and Dr. Rodriguez suggested a familiarity with military procedures that went beyond civilian emergency medicine. When the doctor barked orders in the clipped, efficient manner of a field medic, Harrison's suspicions crystallized. "Doctor," Harrison called out, "can I speak with you for a moment?" Dr. Rodriguez finished issuing instructions to her team before turning to face the police chief. "What can I do for you, Chief Harrison?" "That man, David Carson. You seem to recognize something about him, and the way you handled the situation." Harrison paused, studying her face. "You're military, aren't you?" A shadow crossed Dr. Rodriguez's features. "Former Army medic, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Why?" "Because, Mr. Carson here is former K-9 unit, same theater, and that dog," Harrison gestured toward Rex, who was now lying at David's feet. "That's his former partner. This isn't just some random emergency call." Dr. Rodriguez looked between David and Rex with new understanding. Military working dog teams formed bonds that civilian handlers rarely comprehended. These partnerships were forged under conditions where trust literally meant the difference between life and death. The fact that Rex had recognized David after years of separation spoke to something profound about loyalty and memory. "How long has it been since they've seen each other?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. 5 years, according to Mr. Carson," Harrison replied. "Dog's been working with our department for 2 years. We had no idea about his background." Meanwhile, in Trauma Bay 2, baby Michael was responding to treatment. The warming blankets and heated fluids were bringing his core temperature up gradually, and his skin was returning to a healthier pink color. But David couldn't see the progress from where he sat in the hallway, Rex's head resting on his lap, both of them exhausted beyond measure. Officer Mitchell approached cautiously, uncertain how to handle a situation that seemed to fall outside normal police protocols. "Chief, what do we do here? Technically, we responded to a welfare check, but what crime has been committed?" Harrison finished. "A father trying to get his sick baby to a hospital? A veteran down on his luck?" The chief ran a hand through his graying hair, feeling the weight of decisions that went far beyond law enforcement. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the trauma bay, stripping off her gloves. "The baby's going to be fine," she announced, and David's entire body sagged with relief. "Mild hypothermia, but we caught it in time. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, but there shouldn't be any lasting effects." "Thank God," David breathed, tears streaming down his face. "However," Dr. Rodriguez continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "I need to ask some questions. As a mandated reporter, I have to investigate any situation where a child's welfare might be at risk." David's face went pale. "You think I'm unfit? You think I hurt him?" "I think you're a father who walked through a blizzard to save his son's life," Dr. Rodriguez replied firmly. "But I also think you're in a situation where you might not be able to provide adequate care. When was the last time you had a proper meal? When did you last sleep in a real bed?" The questions hit David like physical blows. "I've been trying," he said desperately. "I lost my job at the garage when Michael was born, had to take time off, and they couldn't hold the position. The VA benefits, they're not enough. But I would never hurt him." "Never." Rex lifted his head, sensing David's distress, and let out a low whine that seemed to echo his handler's pain. The German shepherd struggled to his feet, his arthritis clearly bothering him, but positioned himself protectively beside David. Chief Harrison found himself thinking about his own son, Tommy, remembering the pride he'd felt when the boy enlisted, the crushing grief when the folded flag was placed in his hands. Looking at David and Rex, both broken by their service, Harrison saw a reflection of sacrifices that society was quick to honor in speeches but slow to support in practice. "Dr. Rodriguez," Harrison said slowly, "what would it take to ensure this man can properly care for his son?" The doctor considered the question carefully. Stable housing, adequate nutrition, follow-up medical care for the baby. Basic necessities that most people take for granted. And if those needs were met, then I'd see no reason why this baby couldn't go home with his father. Harrison nodded, making a decision that surprised even himself. "Mr. Carson, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. That dog there, Rex, how well do you know him?" David looked down at the German shepherd, memory flooding back like a tide. "Rex was my partner for 18 months in Afghanistan. We worked explosive detection, convoy security, perimeter patrol. He saved my life more times than I can count." David's voice grew stronger as he spoke about Rex. "He took shrapnel meant for me outside Kandahar. I carried him 6 miles to the evacuation point, thought I was going to lose him." "What happened when you were discharged?" "Military dogs usually retire with their handlers, but I was medically discharged early due to my throat injury. Rex still had active duty time left. I tried to stay in contact, tried to adopt him when he retired, but the paperwork got lost in the system. I thought he'd been placed with another handler or—" David's voice trailed off. Harrison absorbed this information, pieces of a larger picture forming in his mind. "Mr. Carson, Cedar Falls Police Department has been looking for a K-9 trainer, someone with experience working with retired military dogs. The position comes with housing allowance and full benefits." David stared at the chief in disbelief. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance," Harrison replied. "A chance to get back on your feet, to provide for your son, and to work with Rex again, if you're interested." Rex's tail began wagging slowly, as if he understood the conversation. Dr. Rodriguez watched the exchange with growing amazement, recognizing the kind of intervention that changed lives. But before David could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message that would complicate everything they thought they understood about the situation. The text message on David's phone came from a number he didn't recognize, but the words made his blood run cold. "We know you have the baby. Return what you stole or face the consequences. You have 24 hours. David's hands trembled as he read the message, his face draining of what little color had returned since getting warm. Rex immediately sensed his handler's distress, rising to his feet despite the obvious pain in his joints, positioning himself between David and the hospital entrance. "What is it?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, noticing David's sudden change in demeanor. David showed her the phone, his damaged voice barely working. "I don't understand. I didn't steal anything. Michael is my son." Chief Harrison took the phone, reading the message with growing concern. 30 years of police work had taught him to recognize when a simple situation was about to become complicated. "Mr. Carson, is there anyone who might have a claim on your son?" "Any family disputes? Custody issues?" "No," David said firmly. "Sarah's parents died years ago. She was an only child. My parents, they cut contact when I enlisted. There's no one else." But even as David spoke, memories began surfacing, fragments of conversations from the months before Sarah's death that he'd pushed aside in his grief. Sarah had been worried about something, had mentioned phone calls from someone claiming to be a relative. David had dismissed it as stress from the pregnancy, but now— Officer Mitchell's radio crackled to life, interrupting David's thoughts. "Unit 12, we have a situation developing at Cedar Falls General. Reports of suspicious individuals in the parking lot, possibly armed." Harrison's expression hardened. "Mitchell, get back up here now and contact County. We might need more resources." Through the hospital's large windows, they could see vehicles circling the parking lot slowly, their occupants clearly watching the emergency room entrance. Rex's behavior became increasingly agitated. his military training overriding his arthritis as he moved into a protective stance. "David," Dr. Rodriguez said urgently, "I need you to tell me everything about Sarah's pregnancy, about the people who contacted her. This could be about more than just a custody dispute." David's mind raced back through the painful months before Michael's birth. Sarah had been excited about the pregnancy but increasingly anxious as her due date approached. She'd received several phone calls from someone claiming to be her cousin, asking detailed questions about the baby, about their plans, about David's military background. There was a woman, David said slowly, called herself Jennifer Walsh, said she was Sarah's cousin from back east. Sarah didn't remember having any cousin by that name, but the woman knew details about Sarah's childhood, things only family would know. Chief Harrison felt ice forming in his stomach. What kind of details? Her grandmother's maiden name, the name of her first pet, where she went to elementary school. Sarah thought maybe it was a distant relative reaching out, but something felt wrong about it. Dr. Rodriguez exchanged a meaningful look with Harrison. Both had enough experience with dangerous situations to recognize the pattern. Someone had been researching Sarah's background, gathering information that could be used to establish false familial connections. "David, did Sarah ever meet this woman in person?" "She was supposed to, right before Michael was born. The woman said she was coming to visit, wanted to be there for the delivery, but she never showed up. Sarah was relieved, said something felt off about the whole thing." Rex suddenly stood and moved toward the window, his hackles raised, staring intently at something in the parking lot. His low growl brought all conversation to a halt. "What's he seeing?" Mitchell asked, following the dog's gaze. Harrison looked out the window and spotted two figures standing near a dark SUV, both wearing long coats despite the cold, their posture suggesting they were waiting for something. One was speaking into a phone, gesturing toward the hospital. "Dr. Rodriguez, I need you to secure this area," Harrison ordered. "Lock down the trauma bay where the baby is, and don't let anyone in who isn't medical staff." "What about David and Rex?" "They stay with us. If someone's after that baby, they'll have to go through 3 police officers and 1 very angry war dog." But even as Harrison spoke, his radio erupted with reports that chilled him to the bone. "Chief, this is dispatch. We're getting multiple calls about suspicious activity around town. Reports of people asking questions about a baby born 6 months ago, showing photos of Sarah Carson. And Chief, there's something else. We just got word from state police. There's been a series of illegal adoptions connected to a black market operation. They've been targeting single mothers and military families." The pieces of a horrifying puzzle began falling into place. Sarah's mysterious cousin hadn't been family at all. She'd been part of an organization that identified vulnerable pregnant women, gathered personal information to establish false credentials, and then moved in to steal newborns for illegal adoption. "They were planning to take Michael from the beginning," David whispered, the full horror of the situation hitting him. Sarah's death. It wasn't part of their plan. They were going to steal him anyway. Dr. Rodriguez felt sick. As a mother herself, the thought of criminals targeting newborn babies filled her with rage. "David, when Sarah died, did anyone unexpected show up at the hospital? Anyone claiming to be family?" David's eyes widened with realization. "There was a woman at the funeral. I said she was Sarah's cousin, wanted to help with the baby. I was so grief-stricken I barely talked to her, but she kept asking about Michael, about my living situation, about whether I had help." "What did she look like?" "Blonde, maybe 40, well-dressed. Seemed genuinely concerned, but—" David paused, remembering. "She knew things about Sarah that even I didn't know. And she kept asking if I was planning to move, if I had family support." Rex's growling intensified, and through the window they could see more vehicles arriving in the parking lot. What had started as 2 suspicious individuals had grown to at least 6 people, and their behavior was becoming more coordinated, more threatening. Chief Harrison made a command decision. We're moving everyone to a secure location. Dr. Rodriguez, can we access other parts of the hospital without going through the main entrance? There's a service elevator that goes directly to the secure ward. We use it for psychiatric patients and protective custody cases. Do it. Mitchell, get Rex and David up there. I'm calling in every available unit and contacting the state police about this adoption ring. But as they prepared to move, David's phone rang. The caller ID showed only a number, but when he answered, a woman's voice that he recognized from Sarah's funeral spoke with cold authority. Mr. Carson, you have something that belongs to us. We've been very patient, but our patience is running out. That baby was promised to a family who has already paid a substantial sum for him. Michael is my son, David said, his voice gaining strength despite his fear. You have no right. We have every right, the woman interrupted. Sarah contacted us about private adoption arrangements before she died. We have documentation, we have contracts, and we have resources that you clearly lack. Rex moved closer to David, sensing the threat even through the phone conversation. The German Shepherd's military training was taking over, his body language shifting to combat alertness despite his arthritic joints. You're lying, David said. Sarah would never. Sarah was a frightened young woman facing medical bills she couldn't afford, married to a disabled veteran with no prospects. She made the responsible choice. You're just too selfish to honor her wishes. The lie hit David like a physical blow, not because he believed it, but because he could hear how convincing it would sound to authorities who didn't know the truth. These people had done their homework, created a narrative that would make their theft seem legal, even compassionate. Dr. Rodriguez grabbed the phone from David's hand. This is Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Chief of Emergency Medicine. I'm informing you that this hospital is now under police protection, and any attempt to remove this child will be considered kidnapping. The woman's laugh was cold as winter wind. Doctor, you might want to check your facts. We have court documents signed by Sarah Carson herself. This isn't kidnapping, it's legal recovery of stolen property. The line went dead, leaving them all staring at each other in the harsh fluorescent light of the emergency room, while outside the circle of predators tightened around their prey. The siege of Cedar Falls General Hospital began at 2:17 a.m. on Christmas Eve when the first court order arrived via fax to the hospital's administrative office. Dr. Rodriguez stood in the secure ward, reading the document with growing horror, while David sat beside baby Michael's bassinet, Rex lying protectively at his feet. It looks official, Dr. Rodriguez said quietly, not wanting to alarm David further. Adoption papers, allegedly signed by Sarah Carson, witnessed and notarized. Legal guardianship transferred to a Jennifer Walsh, described as Sarah's cousin and next of kin. Chief Harrison examined the documents over her shoulder, his 30 years of experience with legal paperwork making him suspicious. The dates are wrong, he said finally. These papers are dated 3 days before Sarah's death, but the notary stamp shows they were filed last week. Forgeries? Has to be, but good ones. Someone with serious resources put this together. Outside the hospital, the situation was escalating rapidly. What had started as suspicious individuals in the parking lot had grown into a coordinated operation. 3 black SUVs now surrounded the building, their occupants maintaining constant communication via cell phones and earpieces. Local news vans had arrived, drawn by reports of a standoff at the hospital. Officer Mitchell returned from a reconnaissance mission, his face grim. Chief, we've got problems. The woman calling herself Jennifer Walsh just showed up with a sheriff's deputy from Cascade County. She's demanding immediate access to the baby, claiming legal authority. David's world crumbled around him as he watched through the secure ward's reinforced windows. The woman from Sarah's funeral stood in the hospital parking lot, now wearing an expensive suit and flanked by men who looked more like private security than family. She was pointing at the building, gesturing authoritatively, playing the role of a concerned relative to perfection. "She's not Sarah's cousin," David said desperately. "Sarah grew up in foster care. She had no family. These people are thieves, criminals." But even as David spoke, he realized how weak his position was. Sarah's death had left him vulnerable in ways he'd never considered. As a grieving widower struggling with PTSD and financial hardship, he looked exactly like the kind of unfit parent these criminals could exploit. Dr. Rodriguez's pager buzzed with an urgent message from hospital administration. "They're demanding I release the baby immediately. Legal says we could face contempt of court charges if we don't comply." Rex, who had been resting quietly, suddenly stood and moved to the window, his ears forward, his body tense. The German Shepherd had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan learning to read dangerous situations, and every instinct was telling him that threats were approaching. "What's Rex seeing?" Harrison asked. Through the window, they could observe men in maintenance uniforms approaching service entrances to the hospital. Their movements were too coordinated, too purposeful to be random repair work at 2:30 a.m. on Christmas Eve. "They're not maintenance workers," Mitchell observed grimly. "Look at their boots. Tactical, not work boots. And they're all carrying the same style of tool bag." David felt panic rising in his chest. These people had planned this operation carefully, probably for months. They had legal documents, official backing, and resources he couldn't match. Worst of all, they had turned his greatest vulnerability, his love for his son, into a weapon against him. "Chief," David said quietly, "if they take Michael, I'll never see him again." "These aren't people who care about what's best for children. They're running a business." Harrison's radio crackled with updates that made the situation even more dire. "Chief, this is dispatch. The sheriff's deputy has a valid court order. Legal says we have to honor it unless we can prove the documents are fraudulent." "How long do we have?" "They're giving us 10 minutes to produce the child, or they're coming up to get him." Dr. Rodriguez made a decision that would define her career. "I'm declaring a medical emergency. The baby cannot be moved for the next 24 hours due to complications from hypothermia. Any attempt to move him could result in life-threatening relapse." "Doctor, you could lose your license for that." "Better than losing this baby to criminals." Rex suddenly began exhibiting behavior that puzzled everyone present. The German Shepherd moved to David's military jacket, hanging on a chair, and began pawing at one of the pockets. His actions were deliberate, insistent, as if he was trying to communicate something important. "What's he doing?" Mitchell asked. David reached into the pocket Rex was indicating and pulled out a small digital device he'd forgotten he was carrying, a voice recorder Sarah had given him to help with his speech therapy exercises. The device had been recording automatically whenever it detected sound, a feature Sarah had enabled to help track his progress. "My God," David whispered, staring at the device. Sarah used this recorder during her pregnancy to document the baby's development, doctor visits, everything. Dr. Rodriguez understood immediately. If she recorded her conversations with that woman claiming to be her cousin, David's hands shook as he scrolled through weeks of recordings. Most were routine. Sarah talking to her unborn baby, recording doctor visits, capturing moments she wanted to remember. But then, in the week before her death, he found what Rex somehow knew was there. Sarah's voice, clear and strong, filled the room. "I don't care what papers you have, Jennifer, or whatever your real name is. I never signed anything. I never agreed to give up my baby. David is the father and he's a good man. Stop calling here." The woman's response was chilling. "Mrs. Carson, you're not thinking clearly. Your husband is mentally unstable, financially desperate. We can provide a loving home for this child, parents who can give him everything you can't. Get away from my family. If you contact me again, I'm calling the police." That would be unfortunate, Mrs. Carson. We've invested considerable resources in this arrangement. Sometimes accidents happen to people who don't honor their commitments. The recording continued for several more minutes, documenting threats, attempts at manipulation, and Sarah's increasingly frightened but determined resistance. The evidence was overwhelming. This was criminal conspiracy, not legal adoption. Chief Harrison grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, patch me through to the FBI field office in Billings. We have evidence of interstate kidnapping conspiracy and document fraud." But before help could arrive, the hospital's lights flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in seconds later, but the message was clear. The criminals outside weren't content to wait for legal proceedings. They were escalating to direct action. Rex's military training took over completely. The German Shepherd positioned himself between the door and baby Michael's bassinet, his body language shifting to combat mode. Despite his arthritis and age, he was transforming back into the war dog who had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. "They're coming," David said, his own military instincts awakening. "They cut the power to confuse the response, create chaos." It's a basic, tactical approach. Through the secure ward's windows, they could see figures moving through the hospital corridors, no longer maintaining the pretense of being legitimate visitors. These were professionals, moving with military precision toward their objective. Dr. Rodriguez made one final decision that would change everything. She picked up baby Michael, wrapped him in warming blankets, and handed him to David. "Take your son. Rex knows this hospital better than those men do. He's been working here for 2 years. If anyone can get you both out safely, it's him." "What about you? What about the legal?" "Let me worry about the legal issues. You worry about keeping that baby alive and away from those criminals." Rex was already moving toward a service corridor that connected to the hospital's loading dock, his nose working to identify safe routes and potential threats. Despite his physical limitations, the German Shepherd's tactical intelligence was operating at full capacity. David held Michael close, following Rex through darkened hallways, while behind them, the sounds of confrontation echoed through the hospital. Dr. Rodriguez was buying them time, but David knew it wouldn't last long. These people had too many resources, too much planning invested in this operation. As they reached the loading dock, David realized that Rex was leading them not toward escape, but toward what looked like a trap. The dock was surrounded by the same black SUVs that had been circling the hospital, their occupants now openly carrying weapons. "Rex," David whispered, "what are you doing?" But the German Shepherd's ears were forward, his attention focused on something David couldn't yet perceive. Rex had spent years detecting threats that human senses couldn't identify, and he was detecting something now that would either save them or destroy them both. In the distance, sirens were finally approaching, but whether they belonged to help or to more criminals, David couldn't tell. The truth began unraveling at 3:42 a.m. when FBI agent Sarah Chen burst through the hospital's emergency entrance with a team of federal agents, their tactical gear a stark contrast to the sterile medical environment. What she revealed in the next 20 minutes would expose a conspiracy that reached far beyond a simple kidnapping attempt. "Chief Harrison," Agent Chen called out as she approached the secure ward where Dr. Rodriguez was holding off the fake sheriff's deputy with a combination of medical authority and steel-nerved determination. "We've been tracking this organization for 18 months. They call themselves Second Chance Adoptions, but they're actually part of a multi-state human trafficking ring." Harrison felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "Human trafficking? They target military families specifically," Chen explained, pulling out a tablet with files and photographs. "Veterans dealing with PTSD, financial hardship, medical emergencies. They research the families for months, create elaborate false narratives, then either coerce parents into giving up children or simply steal them using forged legal documents." Dr. Rodriguez, still blocking access to the ward, called out, "Agent Chen, there's more. We have recorded evidence of threats made against the mother before her death. But it was the next revelation that hit Chief Harrison like a physical blow. Agent Chen scrolled through files on her tablet until she found a photograph that made Harrison's blood run cold. His own son Tommy, in his army uniform, standing next to a German shepherd that looked remarkably like Rex. "Chief Harrison, your son Thomas was part of the investigation into this organization when he was killed. He'd been gathering intelligence on military families being targeted. That IED explosion wasn't random. It was an assassination." The words struck Harrison with the force of a sledgehammer. For 5 years, he'd blamed the military dog program for failing to protect his son. For 5 years, he'd carried hatred for the war dogs that he believed had let Tommy die. Now he was learning that Tommy had been murdered for trying to protect families exactly like David's. Rex was Tommy's partner, Agent Chen continued, showing Harrison the file. They were investigating second-chance adoptions together. Rex was present during the explosion, not because he failed to detect the IED, but because he was trying to protect Tommy from a targeted attack. Harrison stared at the photograph of his son with Rex, memories flooding back with painful clarity. Tommy had written letters about his canine partner, about how intelligent and loyal the dog was, about their successful missions together. Harrison had burned those letters after the funeral, unable to bear reading about the dog he blamed for his son's death. Meanwhile, in the hospital's loading dock, David crouched behind shipping containers with baby Michael in his arms, Rex positioned protectively beside them. The German shepherd's tactical intelligence had led them not into a trap, but to the one location where the criminals' surveillance couldn't penetrate, directly below the hospital's emergency helipad. Rex's ears perked up at a sound only he could detect, the distant rotor wash of approaching helicopters. His military training told him that air support was incoming, but whether friendly or hostile remained to be determined. "Good boy," David whispered, understanding now that Rex had been leading them to an extraction point. "You remember the sound, don't you? Medevac choppers." The German shepherd's tail wagged slightly, confirmation that his war-trained instincts were operating despite years of domestic police work. Rex had recognized the tactical situation and positioned them for rescue, just as he'd done countless times in Afghanistan. Back in the secure ward, Agent Chen was revealing the full scope of the criminal operation. Second Chance Adoptions has stolen over 200 children in the past 5 years. They sell them to wealthy couples who can't adopt through legitimate channels, people with criminal backgrounds, unstable finances, or other disqualifying factors. "What happens to the real parents?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "Sometimes they're paid off, sometimes they're threatened into silence, and sometimes—" Agent Chen paused, looking directly at Chief Harrison. "Sometimes they're eliminated if they pose too much of a threat to the operation." The implication was clear. Sarah's death might not have been a medical complication during childbirth. It might have been murder, designed to isolate baby Michael and make him vulnerable to theft. David, still hiding in the loading dock, felt his phone vibrate with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, but desperate circumstances demanded desperate measures. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Carson, this is Agent Chen, FBI. I'm in the hospital with Chief Harrison. Your son is safe, but I need you to listen carefully. The people outside aren't just adoption scammers. They're part of a human trafficking network. Your wife Sarah was murdered because she refused to cooperate with them." The words hit David like shrapnel, tearing through his chest with the same devastating force he'd experienced in combat. Sarah hadn't died from medical complications. She'd been killed by the same people now trying to steal their son. "How?" David managed to whisper. "Potassium chloride injection during labor, disguised as a medical emergency. The doctor who administered it has been identified as part of the conspiracy. Sarah fought to protect Michael until her last breath. Rex sensed David's emotional collapse and pressed closer, offering the same comfort he'd provided during David's darkest moments in Afghanistan. The German Shepherd understood trauma in ways that transcended species, recognized the sound of a warrior's heart breaking. "David," Agent Chen continued, "I need you to stay exactly where you are. We have federal agents surrounding the hospital, but these people are heavily armed and desperate. They know their operation has been exposed." Through the loading dock's windows, David could see the black SUVs repositioning, their occupants clearly receiving new orders via radio. The fake Jennifer Walsh was pacing near the hospital entrance, her calm facade cracking as she barked instructions into her phone. But it was Chief Harrison's voice that came through the phone next, heavy with emotion and revelation. "David, I owe you an apology. Rex wasn't just your partner in Afghanistan, he was my son Tommy's partner too. I've been blaming the wrong people for my boy's death." The connection between past and present became crystal clear. Tommy Harrison had died investigating the same criminal organization that was now trying to steal Michael. Rex had been present at both tragedies, first as a witness to an assassination, now as a protector against kidnapping. "Rex saved my unit more times than I can count," David replied. "If he was with Tommy when it happened, then he tried to save your son too. That's what he does. He protects his family." The emotional weight of mutual loss and shared understanding passed between the two men through the phone connection. Both had lost people they loved. Both had blamed the wrong targets for their grief. Both had been brought together by a German shepherd who remembered his duty even when the humans around him had forgotten theirs. Agent Chen's voice cut through the moment with urgent tactical information. "David, we've intercepted communications indicating they're planning to storm the hospital in the next 10 minutes. They know we're here, and they're desperate enough to risk a violent confrontation." Rex's military instincts suddenly went into overdrive. The German shepherd stood, his hackles raised, staring at the loading dock entrance. David followed his gaze and saw armed figures approaching, no longer maintaining any pretense of legitimacy. "They're here," David whispered into the phone, pulling baby Michael closer to his chest. "Rex sees them coming." "Federal agents are moving to intercept," Agent Chen replied. "But David, you need to know. If they get their hands on Michael, you'll never see him again. These people have buyers waiting, transportation arranged. Once he disappears into their network, he's gone forever." Rex moved into a defensive position that David recognized from their combat deployments. Low, ready to spring, positioned to intercept any threat approaching his family. Despite his arthritis and age, the German shepherd was transforming back into the war dog who had never lost a battle. The loading dock doors burst open, and armed figures in tactical gear rushed in, but David couldn't tell if they were criminals or federal agents until Rex made the decision for all of them. The German shepherd charged forward with a speed that defied his years, his jaws locking onto the weapon arm of the lead figure. In that moment, the truth of who was friend and who was enemy would be revealed by the instincts of a war dog who had never forgotten how to protect the innocent. The gunshot that rang out in the loading dock at 4:17 a.m. on Christmas morning was not the sound of violence triumphing, but of justice finally finding its target. Rex's attack on the armed figure had revealed the truth. These were not federal agents but criminals dressed in tactical gear, and the German shepherd's war-trained instincts had identified the threat before any human could react. Agent Chen and her team burst through the hospital's rear entrance just as Rex brought down the lead kidnapper, the dog's powerful jaws clamped around the man's weapon arm with the precision of 8 years of military training. The criminal's gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as he fell, his carefully planned operation crumbling under the assault of a war dog who had never forgotten how to protect his family. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" Chen shouted, her team spreading out to surround the remaining kidnappers. The men who had seemed so confident and professional just moments before now found themselves outmaneuvered by law enforcement officers who had been tracking their organization for months. David pressed himself against the shipping containers, shielding baby Michael with his body while Rex maintained his hold on the gunman. The German shepherd's eyes never left the other criminals, his body language communicating to his pack, David and the baby, that the immediate threat was contained, but vigilance was still required. "It's over, Jennifer," Agent Chen called out as the woman who had claimed to be Sarah's cousin was led into the loading dock in handcuffs. "We have your financial records, your client lists, your communication logs. We know about the 200 children you've stolen. We know about the murders." Jennifer Walsh, whose real name was Rebecca Martinez, a former social worker who had turned her knowledge of vulnerable families into a criminal enterprise, looked at David with cold calculation even in defeat. "You have no idea what you've cost us," she said. "That baby was worth $2 million to the right buyer." The casual way she spoke about Michael's monetary value made David's stomach turn. To these people, his son wasn't a human being but a commodity, a product to be harvested and sold to the highest bidder. Chief Harrison arrived in the loading dock, his face showing the emotional toll of the night's revelations. Seeing Rex still holding the gunman, protecting David and baby Michael, the chief finally understood what his son Tommy had tried to tell him in those letters he'd burned. Military working dogs weren't just tools, they were soldiers, partners, family members who would die before abandoning their duty. "Rex," Harrison called softly, "it's okay, boy. You can let go now." The German shepherd looked at Harrison with recognition that went beyond the 2 years they'd worked together at the police department. Rex had been Tommy's partner, and in some way that transcended human understanding. The dog seemed to recognize Tommy's father. Rex released his grip on the gunman and limped slowly toward Harrison, his tail wagging despite the obvious pain in his joints. Dr. Rodriguez appeared with a medical team, immediately checking baby Michael for any injuries or stress from the ordeal. "He's perfectly fine," she announced, her voice filled with relief. "Heart rate normal, breathing steady. He slept through most of it." "Military babies," David said with a weak smile. "They learn early to sleep through chaos." Agent Chen began the process of unraveling the full scope of the criminal operation. "David, we're going to need extensive testimony from you about the threats made to Sarah, the phone calls, everything you can remember. This case is going to result in arrests across 12 states. "What about the other children?" David asked. "The ones they've already stolen?" "We've been building cases for months. Tonight's arrests will give us leverage to locate the children and reunite them with their families. Your recording of Sarah's conversation with these criminals provided the final piece of evidence we needed." Rex, now sitting beside Chief Harrison, suddenly perked up his ears at a familiar sound, the approaching rotor wash of a helicopter. But this time, David recognized the distinctive sound pattern of a medical evacuation aircraft, the same type that had saved countless lives in Afghanistan. "Medevac chopper," David said to Rex, and the German shepherd's tail wagged in recognition. Some sounds were burned into their shared memory so deeply that time and distance couldn't erase them. The helicopter was landing on the hospital's roof to transport a critical patient to a larger medical facility, but to David and Rex, it sounded like salvation arriving from the sky, just as it had so many times in the war zone. As the immediate crisis passed, Chief Harrison found himself facing a choice that would define the rest of his career and his relationship with his son's memory. He could continue carrying the anger and blame that had poisoned the last 5 years of his life, or he could honor Tommy's sacrifice by helping the people his son had died trying to protect. "David," Harrison said quietly, "that job offer I mentioned earlier, it's still open. Cedar Falls needs a K-9 trainer, someone who understands military working dogs and their handlers, and Rex needs to be with someone who understands his service, his sacrifice. Doctor, Rodriguez was documenting baby Michael's condition for the official record, but she paused to add her voice to the conversation. The hospital has housing available for medical staff. It's not much, but it's warm, it's safe, and it includes full medical coverage for you and Michael. David looked around at the people who had risked their careers and their lives to protect his son. A police chief confronting his own grief, a doctor who had violated protocols to keep a baby safe, an FBI agent who had worked for months to bring down a criminal network, and a war dog who had never forgotten his duty to protect the innocent. Sarah would have wanted this, David said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. She would have wanted Michael to grow up in a place where people look out for each other. Agent Chen finished processing the arrest warrants and turned to David with information that would help heal some of the wounds from the night's revelations. David, we found evidence that Sarah fought back against these people more than you knew. She contacted the FBI 3 weeks before Michael was born, reporting the suspicious phone calls and the threats. She was building a case against them. She never told me. She was protecting you. Sarah knew about your PTSD, knew that you'd want to confront these people directly. She was handling it through official channels, trying to keep you safe while she built evidence for prosecution. The knowledge that Sarah had been fighting to protect their family until the very end brought David both comfort and renewed grief. She had been murdered not because she was weak or vulnerable, but because she was strong enough to stand up to criminals who preyed on military families. Rex, sensing the emotional shift in his handler, moved closer to David and gently nuzzled baby Michael's tiny hand. The gesture was so tender, so protective, that it brought tears to everyone watching. This was not just a police dog or even a military working dog. This was a family member welcoming the newest addition to his pack. As Christmas morning dawn broke over Cedar Falls, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of gold and pink, David stood in the hospital parking lot holding his son while Rex sat beside them, both watching as the last of the criminals were loaded into federal transport vehicles. Chief Harrison approached them, carrying something in his hands, a folded American flag and a military decoration case. "These belong to Tommy," he said. "He would have wanted Rex to have them back, and he would have wanted to meet Michael." David accepted the flag with reverence, understanding the weight of what Harrison was entrusting to him. "I'll make sure Michael knows about his Uncle Tommy, about the hero who died protecting families like ours. And I'll make sure that Rex gets the retirement he's earned," Harrison replied, "with the family he chose. Doctor." Rodriguez joined them, having completed all the medical paperwork and legal documentation. "Michael is officially released into your custody, David, permanently. The state has reviewed the case and found no grounds for removal. You're free to take your son home." Home. For the first time in months, the word held meaning again. Not just a place to live, but a place where David could build a future for his son, where Rex could spend his final years in comfort and dignity, where the sacrifices of people like Tommy Harrison and Sarah Carson would be remembered and honored. As they walked toward Chief Harrison's patrol car, Rex limping but determined to stay close to his family, baby Michael stirred in David's arms and opened his eyes for the first time since the ordeal began. The baby looked directly at Rex, and for a moment that seemed to stretch beyond time, the war dog and the infant studied each other with the solemnity of souls recognizing a shared destiny. "Welcome to the family, Michael," David whispered. "You've got the best guardian angel in the world watching over you." Rex's tail wagged once, slowly, as if acknowledging his new mission. Not hunting for bombs or tracking enemies, but something far more important, protecting the next generation of the family he had chosen to serve. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve 2024, David Carson stood in the kitchen of his small apartment above the Cedar Falls Police Department, watching his son Michael take his first tentative steps across the linoleum floor. At 18 months old, the boy was sturdy and bright-eyed, showing no lingering effects from that terrifying night when he'd nearly been stolen by human traffickers. Rex lay on his favorite blanket near the window, his arthritis more pronounced now, but his spirit undimmed. The German shepherd's eyes tracked Michael's every movement with the devotion of a grandfather watching his favorite grandchild. When the toddler stumbled and fell, Rex would struggle to his feet and gently nuzzle the boy until he was ready to try again. "Da-da!" Michael squealed, launching himself toward David's waiting arms, but then, as he had done every day for the past 6 months, the boy turned toward Rex and babbled, "Wex, Wex." It had been Rex's name that came second in Michael's vocabulary, right after Dada and well before bottle or more. Dr. Rodriguez, who had become not just Michael's pediatrician but a close family friend, insisted this was evidence of the profound bond between the boy and the dog. Chief Harrison knocked on the apartment door as he did every Sunday evening for their weekly dinner. At 69 years old, the police chief had found a new lease on life in his role as honorary grandfather to Michael. The weekly dinners had become sacred time when 3 generations, Harrison, David, and baby Michael, gathered around a table that Rex monitored from his position of honor nearby. "How's our boy today?" Harrison asked, scooping Michael up for his traditional airplane ride around the living room. The sight never failed to make David smile. This gruff police chief who had once carried so much anger now transformed into a doting grandfather figure. "He took 6 steps in a row this morning," David reported proudly. "Rex was coaching him the whole way." Harrison looked at the German shepherd with renewed appreciation. Over the past year, he had learned to see Rex not as the dog who had failed to save his son Tommy, but as the partner who had shared Tommy's final mission and now continued that mission by protecting a new generation. The kitchen table was set for 3, with a special mat on the floor for Rex, who always received a small portion of whatever they were eating. Dr. Rodriguez had prescribed the German shepherd a special diet to help with his arthritis, but she'd also noted that his will to live seemed directly connected to his sense of purpose in protecting Michael. "Any word from Agent Chen about the trial?" Harrison asked as they sat down to dinner. David nodded, cutting Michael's food into tiny pieces, while Rex watched attentively from his mat. "The main trials start next month. They've identified and recovered 87 of the stolen children so far. Rebecca Martinez and her network are looking at life sentences without parole." The prosecution of the human trafficking ring had become a federal case study in how criminal organizations targeted military families. David's recorded evidence of Sarah's conversations with the criminals had proven crucial in securing convictions across 12 states. But more importantly, it had led to the rescue of dozens of children who might otherwise have disappeared forever into the black market adoption system. "Sarah would be proud," Harrison said quietly, and David nodded. They had developed a tradition of mentioning Sarah during these dinners, ensuring that Michael would grow up knowing about his mother's courage and sacrifice. Michael, oblivious to the adult conversation, was more interested in dropping pieces of his dinner onto the floor, where Rex waited patiently. The German shepherd had learned that his role as protector sometimes included cleaning up after his small human, a duty he performed with the same dedication he had once brought to detecting explosive devices. "The funny thing," David said, watching his son interact with the dog, "is that Michael isn't afraid of anything when Rex is around. Last week a thunderstorm rolled through that had me jumping out of my skin, brought back some memories from overseas. But Michael just crawled over to Rex and went to sleep against his side." "Military dogs understand trauma," Harrison observed. "They know how to provide comfort in ways that humans sometimes can't." After dinner, they moved to the living room for their evening ritual. David would read to Michael from a children's book while Harrison worked on his weekly crossword puzzle, and Rex maintained his vigilant watch over the family. It was a scene of domestic tranquility that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. Dr. Rodriguez stopped by around 8 o'clock, as she often did after her shift at the hospital. She had become Michael's unofficial godmother, checking on his development and providing medical care that went far beyond her professional obligations. "How's his speech coming along?" she asked, settling into the chair that had become known as Elena's spot. "He's got about 15 words now," David replied. "But Rex is still his favorite." As if summoned by his name, Rex lifted his head from his blanket and looked at Michael, who immediately crawled over and curled up against the dog's warm side. The sight of the toddler sleeping peacefully against the old war dog had become a symbol of healing and hope for everyone who witnessed it. "David," Dr. Rodriguez said carefully, "I need to talk to you about Rex's health." The tone in her voice made David's stomach clench. Over the past year, Rex had become more than just a companion. He was family, a living link to David's military service and a guardian angel for Michael. "His arthritis is progressing," Dr. Rodriguez continued gently. "The X-rays show significant joint deterioration. He's managing the pain well, but he's suffering," David finished. "He's an old soldier," Harrison said quietly. "He's earned the right to choose his own battlefield." They all looked at Rex, who seemed to sense the conversation was about him. The German shepherd's eyes were still bright and alert, his devotion to Michael unwavering. But David could see the careful way Rex moved, the moments when he thought no one was looking and allowed his pain to show. "How long?" David asked. "It's not about time," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "It's about quality of life. Right now, he has purpose, he has family. As long as he's finding joy in his days, as long as he's not suffering. He'll let us know when he's ready," David said, reaching down to stroke Rex's graying muzzle. "He's never been one to give up on a mission." As the evening wound down and their friends prepared to leave, David found himself reflecting on the strange turns his life had taken. A year ago, he had been a homeless veteran with a sick baby and no hope for the future. Tonight he was a respected member of the community, training the next generation of K9 handlers while Rex provided wisdom and experience that couldn't be found in any manual. The K9 training program David had developed was already gaining national attention. Military working dogs retiring from service were being placed with veteran handlers, creating partnerships that honored both the humans and animals who had served their country. Rex had become the program's mascot and chief instructor, demonstrating that even old warriors could find new purposes. After everyone had gone home, David performed his nightly routine of checking all the locks, turning off the lights, and ensuring Michael was sleeping peacefully in his crib. Rex followed him through the apartment, a ritual they had established during those first uncertain weeks when every shadow might have hidden a threat. "Just you and me again, old friend," David said to Rex as they settled in the living room for a few minutes of quiet before bed. Rex looked at him with eyes that held the wisdom of 8 years of military service and the contentment of a dog who had found his true family. The German shepherd's tail wagged slowly, a gesture of satisfaction and peace that spoke more eloquently than words ever could. David pulled out his phone and scrolled to a video he had recorded earlier that day. Michael taking his longest walk yet, 6 steps from the couch to Rex's blanket, where the dog waited with infinite patience to congratulate his small human with gentle licks and soft whines of encouragement. "Sarah," David whispered to the photograph on the mantel. "He's going to be okay. We all are." Rex lifted his head at the sound of Sarah's name, a gesture that had become routine over the past year. The German shepherd had never met Sarah, but he seemed to understand that she was an important part of the family's story, a guardian angel watching over them all. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, but this time it brought no fear, no desperation. This time it was simply the beauty of another Christmas Eve in Cedar Falls, a town that had learned the true meaning of family through the unlikely bond between a broken veteran, his infant son, and an aging war dog who had never forgotten his duty to protect the innocent. The last thing David saw before drifting off to sleep in his comfortable chair was Rex positioned between the front door and Michael's bedroom, maintaining his eternal vigil. Some missions, David reflected, never really end. They just evolve into something more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. In his dreams that night, David saw Sarah holding their son, with Rex sitting proudly beside them both, his service finally recognized, his sacrifice finally honored, his love finally home. To our viewers aged 55 to 68, this story reminds us that family isn't always born. Sometimes it's forged through shared sacrifice and unconditional love. Like Chief Harrison discovering that healing comes not from holding on to anger, but from opening our hearts to new connections, we all have the power to create meaningful bonds that transcend our past hurts. Rex's devotion to protecting Michael mirrors the way many of you have spent decades protecting and nurturing the next generation, showing that true purpose often comes from serving something greater than ourselves. The beautiful truth is that it's never too late to find new family, to heal old wounds, or to discover that our greatest strength lies not in what we've lost, but in what we choose to protect and cherish. What family bonds in your own life have surprised you with their strength? Have you ever found healing through helping others, the way Chief Harrison did by embracing David and Michael as family? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might inspire someone else who needs to hear that second chances and found families are real.